think this show for me, I think it's both a consolidation and a departure from previous works and previous shows. I think as far as gleam is concerned, I know it's a funny word, but I'm really interested in words, and for me it was a very definite idea about gleam being a kind of brilliant light, and for me it was a kind of a light on art history, and not a light in the work themselves, not shiny polished things, but the idea of kind of traversing this new landscape with this idea of light and just casting that light on different aspects of art history, from romanticism, heroism, the sublime in painting, notions of landscape, of the figure, of art historical artists and their approach to such classical canons as the figure and landscape. I quite like the idea of setting up contradictions or exploring opposites and polarities. And The Englishman really came about out of an idea of the other figures, but I wanted to explore new materials, and those pieces are actually made out of pewter, which is a very old-fashioned material to use. You know, the Victorians might use it for their cups and plates, but as a sort of sculptural medium, it's not a very used material. Also because it's incredibly difficult to work with. It's a very soft metal, but it's incredibly difficult to weld and finish. So from a practical kind of perspective, it was a difficult piece to make. But The Englishman as an idea is I quite like setting up. They're obviously boxers, and I quite liked trying to get to that idea of, the English have a kind of reputation for being a bit like fighters, you know, and I kind of wanted to sort of set that up in a contemporary context so that you have these kind of mirrored forms opposing each other. So basically it's like a stalemate. They're fighting a losing battle, they're kind of held in stasis in this kind of position. But interesting in the piece as well is they're doubles of each other, so actually it's one figure which has been set up with another figure fighting itself. So you have a nice interesting dichotomy about, you know, the self, the other, the reflection, and so on and so forth.
You're interested in heroicism. Why is that?
I think it comes from a place of I'm interested in the idea of the heroic artist, and the fact that that's actually a myth. There's no such thing as a heroic artist. You know, it's something that Victorians made up to appeal to the masses. It gave people a focus in their art. They could look to this idea of this heroic artist painting heroic landscapes or making monumental sculpture. It's a nice idea. So I'm interested in that as a kind of form of cultural trickery in a way, but I'm also interested in the idea of subverting that idea of heroism in some kind of way. So you'll notice the figures are in heroic poses. They come from original Victorian objects, but the top part of the sculpture is obfuscated and softened, so you get this kind of contrast between representation and abstraction, and you get this kind of it's both a kind of heroic fighting pose, but it's also a softened, protected shield kind of pose too. So I kind of like that contradiction as well, or that new kind of idea of heroicism, which becomes about romanticism. So you kind of subvert that macho notion of the male hero into something a bit more interesting and a bit more ambiguous.
You started off as a painter and then you worked with installations. Now you're going back to painting. Can you talk about why you decided to do that right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think painting's always been really important to me. I started as a painter, as you said, and you know, those paintings kind of got bigger, they got wider, they became installations, they became sculptures, and then they sort of fragmented and separated themselves in some way. And painting kind of rested for me for a while in its pure kind of essence, but I think I've always had a painterly approach to everything that I do. So there's a kind of there's a layering either of material or of context or concepts, and one can read that in a painterly way, for me at least. But I think the painting has kind of re-emerged after a period spent in Italy. I was awarded a scholarship to explore bronze making, and I think the physicality of using material with a view to making bronzes really kind of brought the notion of paint as a physical medium back to me. So I think in this show is a consolidation and a departure. So I work with existing paintings and I sand away the surfaces. In this show I've sanded away the surface, but I've also painted back over that surface. But at the same time I've began painting straight onto aluminium and straight onto ply. So there's something within that is emerging as a kind of new painterly expression for me, but I think it's through the experience of revisiting material itself, particularly through that residency in Italy, that has really brought that back to the fore.
So can you tell me about your painting? I want to be heroic, but I'm just too romantic. What was the inspiration for it?
I often think about making a piece of work through words first, and I'll kind of write down a line from a book that I've read, or I'll write down a few words in a certain order that I think are interesting. And with that piece, I think it was, I've had that line in mind for something for a very long time, be it a show or be it a piece of work. And I think something about this show and its exploration of heroicism, romanticism, are they the same thing? Can they coexist? Does it really matter? Just really came out of making that painting. It's a very physical, immediate painting. It was executed quite quickly, and the title just fell into place with the kind of ethos of the work. It's a rocky kind of landscape looking out to a sea, but it's very soft and it's collapsing. So, you think about that heroic, very physical, present idea, and you think about that romantic, very soft, contoured kind of idea. And I think for me, as with the show, in that piece of work, I think they come together in that way.
So unlike I Want to Be Heroic, but I'm just too romantic, which you painted from scratch? From
Yes.
the start. The two paintings behind
Yes.
you. Remind me the name.
There were fireworks in the sky, and then there's a bracket and another title, which is riffing on Turner, Polk 2, because I think that those references to Turner have come up in my work again and again, partly because of the way they look and partly because of what they're about. But these paintings here they were existing landscapes, different landscapes by different people, and they were sanded back and kind of left to rest for quite a long time. But not very much of the original landscape remained, so they might as well have not been there. But something about the bones of that I was able to work with and basically start to overpaint back into what was there, and these new landscapes emerged. And when I saw them, they were very obviously Turner-esque. They had the kind of same coloration. Not to say they had the same grandeur or conviction, but they were very obviously. So I thought it was important to acknowledge that elsewhere in my work, I do kind of, I sometimes feel like I'm a magpie, and I kind of take these, pick at these art historical bones for the kind of shining resonance of something left. And I think, particularly in this work, that happened again. So I thought I was kind of keen to acknowledge that, and to be a bit playful with the title as well, to be a kind of bit flippant as well as being a bit serious.